I'm curious. I am curious. Curious.
By nature.
Estimates suggest that 10 to 30% of students are neurodivergent. What does the future employment of these students look like? Neurodiverse employees have many strengths, but can companies adjust to the needs of these employees? My guest has a new book, Neurodiversity in Work, which looks at many aspects that can be improved for employees and companies. Welcome, Dr. Patton. Please introduce yourself and tell us about your work.
Thank you, Jessica. My name is Eric Patton. I'm a professor of management at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia.
Can you tell me more about your work?
Well, basically, we just completed a really exciting and fulfilling project, which is the publication of the book Neurodiversity in the Workplace, which is a collaborative effort involving around 30 different professors from various different universities, all focusing, and actually some support organizations as well, all focusing on how to better include and create a more welcoming environment for individuals who might be members of neurominority. So people who might have autism, maybe have ADHD, dyslexia, etc.
Who would be a potential reader? Like, who do you think would gain from reading this book?
This book is really aimed at many, many stakeholders. On the one hand, it's aimed at employers who might not be aware that there's this very valuable population of potential workers out there that are eager for work, that are highly skilled, but have barriers, to full employment and full participation in the workforce. So it's aimed, on the one hand, at employers. It's also aimed at parents, also who are looking for resources in terms of what are the options out there in terms of career paths and whatnot. It's also aimed at members of neurominorities themselves, clarify some areas of interest, some pathways towards employment that might not be readily available or apparent, to them. So it's a very interdisciplinary book. We have researchers who focus on ethics, researchers who focus on human resources, entrepreneurship, vocational rehabilitation, sort of high school to employment pathways, college to employment pathways. And we also have a chapter regarding the large number of support organizations that exist in the community that are there to support individuals who, for example, might be on the autism spectrum or have ADHD and are looking to, fully participate in work.
In order for a company to make those adjustments and to accommodate people, they would need to know that someone is neurodivergent. So is that something that people always make known to their employer?
Well, that's a really good question, Jessica. And that's actually another challenge for members of neurominorities, in this population, because most of these conditions are invisible. And legally, from an Americans with Disabilities Act and most similar legislation in other countries, the onus is on the employee or the job candidate to disclose that I have a condition and that I require potentially some special accommodations. And that can be very, very scary for a lot of people. We have a chapter in the book that talks about stigma around anything to do with mental health. And there are some general, stigmas and fears around disability, in all fields. The disclosure is a barrier. That's a real one. And when it comes to people who are on the autism spectrum, one of the challenges for a lot of individuals with that condition is sort of self-advocacy and communication. So, the idea of actually asking and disclosing can be definitely, a challenge. And that's always a very difficult dynamic on the one hand, to have the protection of the Americans with Disabilities Act and to get access to a lot of the reasonable accommodations that will be inexpensive. It is up to the employee to self-disclose and identify. The way the law is written, if you have sort of an apparent workplace disabilities, you don't have to disclose. You can actually still have access to accommodations in the workplace. But there's some very interesting research, and one of the authors in our book has written about this, which is oftentimes when it comes to workplace disabilities, if somebody has a more serious condition, the stigma and the fear and the barriers become higher. With things like autism or ADHD or dyslexia, if you have a very mild form of those conditions, that can almost be, in a way, more stigmatizing, because then people, may not believe you actually have a condition that merits a special accommodation, and they might just perceive you to be a difficult person or somebody who seems to be acting in a way that doesn't seem to conform with how we act around here. or whatever. But my own personal research, I have done some research. Disclosure, or as scary as it might be, is actually preferable than hiding and trying to. And there's a large body of research on this, whether this has to do with neurodiversity, whether this has to do with sexual orientation or gender identity. The idea of trying to hide something that's an important part of who you are is not typically good for an individual.
Yes. And do you have examples of companies that are doing a really good job in connecting and working with neurodivergent population?
Yeah, actually, there are a lot of companies that are doing some really, really impressive work. And one of the things especially with autism, we often say, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. It's a spectrum of individuals with different levels of skills, different levels of abilities, and different levels of challenges. But some of the companies, really large companies who've gotten involved is SAP, for example. They've been a very early adopter of neurodiversity in the workplace. Ernst & Young, Home Depot, has a program. I know in the Philadelphia area, a lot of the grocery store chains. And again, these are people with different levels of skills, different levels. Dell, Microsoft has also been, heavily involved. And there are a host of small companies also. And I think a common thread for a lot of these companies and a lot of them are doing different things. A lot of them are entry-level jobs. Others are high-level, maybe computer programming jobs, or in different areas. Because the reality is the research clearly shows that, for example, people who have autism or are autistic, incredibly hardworking. And I'm not going to above average here. Hardworking, very detail-oriented, extraordinary memory, very visual learners and thinkers, loyal, honest, they show up, they're not late, very reliable, willing to do repetitive work, and really able to develop really high-level skills in very specific areas. People with dyslexia, great visual learners and thinkers, and able to kind of think outside the box and be very creative. People with ADHD, incredibly energetic, very, very creative, very, very high energy. These are individuals that have, no matter where they fall on any of these conditions, have a lot to offer. And what I would say a key ingredient, and I alluded to it before in terms of when I mentioned the climate, a lot of I think companies, large or small, that have been leaders in this area, the support comes from the very highest level. There's a lot of executives, senior leaders in organizations and companies who this is very personal to them. As I mentioned before, oftentimes people have a direct connection through their children, through grandkids, through nieces and nephews, family members. That's definitely a key, component, is engaging people at the very top of an organization. And that goes for a multinational, huge corporation to maybe a small consulting firm down the block or an ice cream shop or whatever, it might be.
Yes. Do you know the numbers on neurodiversity in terms of maybe how many adults in the U.S. are neurodiverse, and maybe how many neurodiverse adults are employed?
Yeah, the employment numbers are not good, and I think that's
are not good. You said
not good, right?
Okay.
Basically, the estimates. I'll just use autism as an example. I think the current estimates in the United States for children are 1 out of every 36 children. For adults, I've seen 1 in every 45 adults. And again, it's one of those ideas where a lot of these conditions are viewed as childhood learning, something that happens in school, but it definitely transports for the entire population of neurodiversity. If you're including, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, there's a few other, conditions. Estimates are around 15 to 20% of all adults, have one of these conditions. So it's a significant proportion of society. As far as employment outcomes go, it's not necessarily a great picture around, most estimates say, as far as autism goes, for example, you're looking at probably only 20% of autistic people have a job, compared to 83% of sort of the neurotypical, population, or people with no workplace disabilities. And even, and that 20% is actually far behind even what people who also have other types of workplace disabilities. Usually it's around 50% of the people with workplace disabilities are employed, but only 20% of people with autism. There's also, some statistics out there that show that around 25% of the prison population meets the criteria for ADHD. A third of the long-term unemployed are dyslexic. And also, even of those who are employed, and I'm kind of thinking again back specifically with autism, many people are underemployed. And that means they're in jobs that are well below skill level, their education level, and whatnot. And the truth is, all of, the neurodivergent population, as far as like intelligence and skills, and it's it's very similar to the neurotypical, population. So it's a real sort of wasted opportunity for, I think, employers with potential workforce who are intelligent, hardworking, loyal, really, really strong employees. And of course, it's a very, very sad state of affairs for people who are part of neurominorities. Given that, work is definitely one of the major life activities that we all have. It's where I think a lot of us get our successes, our failures, a lot of our relationships, a lot of who we are as individuals, has a huge impact on our lifestyles and where we live and how we live. And, to have only 20% of people, for example, on the autism spectrum who are participating in that really, really important part of life is, I think, another very, very strong motivation for putting out this book. And I think all of us who are doing research in this space also, view this as something that we'd love to see rectified.
Was there something in your book that you found to be surprising information or research that you weren't expecting?
There was a few things, actually. We cast a wide net. We wanted it to be very multidisciplinary and, and again, different voices. And I think I mentioned, we have several of the authors who are members of neurominorities themselves. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I was less aware of, which I was really interested in, were one, we have a really interesting chapter on leveraging technology in, to help neurodiversity inclusion, including AI, in terms of finding there's all sorts of, and I wasn't aware of this really, all sorts of really, really cool websites and tools. A lot of them are available for free that can be used to identify strengths and weaknesses and proper fits in different jobs. Also, some really cool virtual reality even techniques to allow people to try to complete different tasks and have an environment where they can test things out in a different way. And something else which I got to learn a lot about myself, were just the number of support organizations that exist in various communities. There are many organizations, a lot of nonprofits, some of them are for-profits. They're tackling this issue at very, very different points of contact. There are some organizations that are focused very much on helping individuals find work and working with them and their parents in order to sort of help them get a good start. There are some support organizations that work with employers and the whole recruitment and selection piece. There are organizations that work with schools and are directly tied into high schools and universities. There are other ones that give on-the-job coaching to companies once a member of a neurominority is hired. I think something that was just very, very heartening for me, just throughout all of the chapters, just getting these group of authors together, and even at the conferences and whatnot that I've been involved in, is just how collaborative everybody is. That's not always the case necessarily in academia. I think there are some nuggets in, all throughout the book in the different chapters that were, we have a chapter on gender and the intersection, of that and neurodiversity, which again, some of these things, you want to use the word diagnosed or sort of identified differently for boys and girls, men and women. And again, some of the accommodations or some of the manifestations, are different as well, which is also very interesting.
After now publishing your book, what are you now curious about? What are you interested in?
One of the goals of the book is to, I guess, encourage further research in this area. This book is actually part of a series from Palgrave Macmillan on new directions in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I was really happy when the professor who's in charge of the entire series, and he's someone who's really, really very well known in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And he was like, there are a lot of books on gender, a lot of books on race, a lot of books on LGBTQIA. He says, I would like this to be maybe some DEI topics that aren't so dug into, yet. And one of these topics was neurodiversity. I still view this as a very new area. And what I really hope is, you asked at the beginning, who is this book aimed for? One of the big groups are other researchers. And, I think there are, whether it's from an ethics point of view, I think there's some legal things that still need to be worked on. What you mentioned about disclosure, creating climate entrepreneurship, these are all areas, technology, these are all things that I think we're just at the beginning. So probably my greatest hope for this book is that it'll inspire more scholarship from different researchers.
Well, I wish you all the best with your book. Where can people find it?
It's available at Springer, springerlink.com. It's published by Algrave Macmillan. I believe it's available through most of the major booksellers, as well. Hopefully it'll show up in some of your libraries, your local libraries, your university libraries in the near future. Yeah.
I agree. Congratulations.
Well, thanks.
Thank you.
Curious by Nature is a production of Newswise. More than 7,000 journalists get the Newswise wires. Visit newswise.com and find out how to spread your news today.